So as a business owner, not only is it difficult for you to open a business, but of course, when you finally open a business here in Canada, you're taxed when you earn, you're taxed when you hire, you're taxed when you grow, and then of course you're taxed again if you sell.
Do you ever feel like it's exceedingly difficult to get ahead in Canada? It doesn't matter how hard you work. There's a level of difficulty you feel, especially the harder you work. But it's not even just about the harder you work. Even life expectancy is going down in a country as prosperous and developed as Canada. We are going to discuss it in today's video and try to ask the question, why has this happened to this country, and why has this happened to especially young people here in Canada? With that being said, let's dive straight into today's video topic.
So as a business owner, not only is it difficult for you to open a business, but of course, when you finally open a business here in Canada, you're taxed when you earn, you're taxed when you hire, you're taxed when you grow, and then of course you're taxed again if you sell through the capital gains tax. So would you say that success then in Canada is in fact punished?
Absolutely. And, you know, we talk about that. You can see that in the productivity numbers, right? I mean, there's compelling documents, reports. One is through NBC Economic Strategy and Data Reports. And the title is called The Industrial Implosion. And it clearly identifies investments in capital and growth in the United States versus Canada. And I'll just hold this up quickly, but I'm sure it can be supplied. These charts represent the blue line, the United States, and its investment strategy on equipment and capital. And you can see the red line for Canada over the last 10, 15 years. So, yes, it's just, when I talked about earlier, the question was asked, when you talk about high input costs, meaning wages, to the immigration policy issue, we tried to hire some engineers and program managers during growth in Canada, and each one of them all of them coming into our facility wanted $80,000 to $100,000 to start. And they referenced the high living expenses in Toronto, for instance. And, between the car insurance costs, between the rent costs, between the living costs, we hear every reason why, as an owner and as an entrepreneur, I need to be burdened with all these costs in order to compete. And when you're competing against companies in Georgia who are paying $16 to $17 for general labor, they're paying their program management engineering teams an average wage of $70,000 to $80,000 in U.S., compare that to Mexico at $65,000 US dollars, and you're looking at people in Canada wanting $130,000. This just makes us, completely uncompetitive.
I think the thing that frustrates me the most out of all of this is if you own your own small business and you want to expand, the hiring tax is the most asinine thing in the world. When you're hiring people, you're hiring employees who are ultimately going to be paying tax as well. So if the government doesn't want you to hire and get more people to pay taxes by implementing these stupid taxes like the hiring tax, does it really seem like they want you to succeed in Canada? This is why there's so much brain drain as well, because other countries like the United States just offer better salaries compared to what Canada is offering. And even if people want to work in Canada, they look at the living expenses in big cities like Toronto and Vancouver, and they say, it's just not worth it for me at this point. I might as well just try to get a visa in the States or maybe another country, somewhere even in Europe.
Something I found interesting about the latest ECOS polling was the trend between the age of Canadians and whether or not they are more likely to support a bigger government that provides more services or a smaller government that provides less services. So generally speaking, younger Canadians are more likely to support a larger government with higher taxes and more services. And as the age increases, more people tend to support having a smaller government with lower taxes and fewer services.
I feel like that goes against common sense if you really think about it. The older you get, you'd think that they'd want more government services because they need to be taken care of a little more when they get older, whether it's pensions or even just health, right? So if you have free healthcare in a country like Canada, you'd think that as you get older, you'd want a bigger government to offer these services to you. If you're younger, you should be a little bit more brave and courageous and try to maneuver through the world without a massive government. But again, who knows where they actually pulled this? It could have just been like downtown Toronto or downtown Vancouver, because I feel like it's goes against common sense.
Get a job nowadays in Canada?
Yeah, I'm gonna say yes, because a couple of my friends are unemployed, it's hard to get a job because straight out of high school, it was like if you have no experience, you're not getting anything. So you had to start early. If you didn't start early, you're not getting a job.
I think the reason is, bro.
Competitive market, you know, like it depends on the job you're trying to get. Like if you're trying to get a job at McDonald's, like you can get that easy. But if you're trying to get like a serious job, like you have to have experience. And there's so many people in Calgary now. We're just getting bigger. It's hard.
Think of AI, bro. Like, are you afraid of losing your job to AI? Like, how do you see it, bro, as a young person? How do you see that coming?
Honestly,
bro? Like,
I'm not really scared of AI because I feel like the job that I want to get isn't obstructed by AI's presence.
Yeah.
But like if I was in like a, let's say, software engineering, I'd be a little scared.
Yeah, it really depends on which career, but I ultimately think AI definitely is a threat to a certain extent for a lot of jobs and a lot of careers. But yeah, if you want to work just some sort of manual labor job right now, they don't really have the implementations yet for AI to be completely merged with a robotic system that could replace the common worker. I know they have those Tesla bots out there now, but I just can't see them doing construction quite yet. Maybe in 5 to 10 years, who knows? But also kind of disagree a little bit with what he said about difficulty finding a job at McDonald's. He says is relatively easy. I actually don't think that is the case anymore. I've done lots of videos showing the massive lines at job fairs and even just places like McDonald's when they have a hiring sign. You get a ton of people who are even just looking for a part-time job, right? Because at the end of the day, if you can't have one good job, you have to work a little longer throughout the week and maybe work 2 to 3 little part-time jobs to try to make ends meet. So now we're going to go into some comments that coincide with this video as well. So if you do want to leave some comments on some of my videos, I might pick yours for the next one. So let's dive into the first comment here. My old apartment in 2010 was renting for $525 a month inclusive. I moved out, purchased a condominium in 2010. Now my previous rental is $1,750 a month plus utilities and parking in 2025. $1,750 plus utilities. And utilities in the wintertime can spike like crazy. And on top of that, parking as well. And parking can be very expensive in massive cities like Vancouver, right? So that is pretty bad. If I never purchased my condominium in 2010, I would be out in the streets in 2025. I feel blessed to have my home completely paid for. It's a shame a lot of individuals sat on the sideline when housing interest rates were cheap 10 to 15 years ago. And some of these individuals, they might have sat on the sidelines, but there also were individuals who were like Gen Z millennials who just weren't at the stage in their life where they had enough resources, stable income to actually purchase a house or a condominium. So it really also feels like it's a generational thing on top of that, as well as just, you know, bad timing. Matt, no idea why everyone thinks it's so cheap to live in Nova Scotia. We moved from a big city in Ontario and absolutely everything except if you want to buy a house costs more here. Power, groceries, gas, food, etc. I've actually learned this same lesson, but it was from moving to Toronto to Calgary, that the prices of things here are relatively the same as Toronto. In fact, in some regards, I think they're even more expensive in Calgary. Now, I know you have the 5% tax on top of things you purchase here compared to Toronto's 13%. So it really depends on what you're looking at, but I find like things like insurance are more expensive here in Calgary than they are in Toronto. And also groceries kind of seemed a little more expensive here in Calgary, believe it or not, than in Toronto. But of course, housing is cheaper here in Calgary, and that's ultimately why we made that move. And that might have been why you ultimately also made that move to Nova Scotia, right? Housing is going to be super expensive in Ontario and BC, but relatively cheaper, but not cheap. Definitely not cheap in Canada. It's still really expensive, but relatively cheaper than places obviously like Ontario and BC. So I hope you guys learned something from today's video. If you did, leave your comments down below and I might select it for the next video, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care.